I set the envelope on the kitchen counter and didn't open it for 3 days. I knew what was inside. I had mailed the kit myself 6 weeks earlier, standing at the post office in my scrubs after a 12-hour shift, hands still smelling faintly of antiseptic. The woman behind the counter had smiled at me like it was nothing. Just a small cardboard box, just a cotton swab and a vial, just everything I had ever believed about myself folded neatly into a prepaid mailer. I didn't open it because I was afraid of what it would say, and I was afraid of what it would say because of my sister. That's the part I keep coming back to, even now. My sister was the one who planted the doubt. My sister was the one who handed me the shovel and told me to dig. And my sister was the one who smiled the whole time she watched me do it. Let me tell you how it actually started. My father was a quiet man. Not cold, just contained, the way certain people are, like they're always holding something precious close to their chest so it won't spill. He was an engineer, retired, living in the same house in Richmond where my sister and I had grown up. He made his coffee black. He kept a vegetable garden in the backyard from March through October. He called me every Sunday at 7 in the evening, not because we had planned it, but because that's what he did, and I grew up believing it was one of the most reliable things in the world. My sister Brooke was 7 years older than me. She had my father's height and our mother's ambition, which is a combination that, in a person without much warmth, can feel like standing in front of a closed door. She had done everything right. The business degree, the corner office at a consulting firm in D.C., the husband with the last name that opens certain rooms. She had never, not once in my memory, looked at me like I belonged. Growing up, I thought it was just the age gap. 7 years between sisters can feel like a generation when you are 12 and she is 19, already halfway out the door and looking back only when it was convenient. I used to follow her around the house like a shadow she hadn't noticed yet. She never seemed to notice. It wasn't until I was older that I understood the shape of it. What she felt wasn't indifference. It was something more deliberate. The first time she said anything, I was 17. We were alone in the kitchen after Christmas dinner, and she was doing the dishes and I was drying, and she said it so casually I almost missed it. Almost. "You know, Mom wasn't exactly faithful," she said, not looking at me, "just scrubbing a pot, before you were born." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. She handed me the pot and moved on to the next dish, and neither of us brought it up again for years. But she didn't drop it. She never dropped it. She just carried it differently, tucked it into the edges of conversations, set it down lightly, and walked away. A comment at my college graduation about how I had my father's determination, pause, or someone's determination, anyway. A remark at my mother's birthday about how I was the only one in the family who hadn't gotten Dad's height. Funny how genetics work sometimes. Small things. Consistent things. The kind of thing that, if you said them out loud to someone else, would sound paranoid. The kind of thing designed to sound paranoid. My mother had died when I was 22. A stroke, sudden, the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare. After that, it was just the three of us, my father, my sister, and me, and whatever my sister was building in the silences between us, she had more room to build it. I moved to Austin after nursing school. I told myself it was for the hospital, for the career, for the city. Partly that was true. Partly I needed distance from the thing my sister kept doing, that quiet, persistent erosion. My father visited twice a year. We talked every Sunday at 7. That was enough. That was what I held on to. Then came the Thanksgiving that changed everything. My father had been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease the previous spring. Nothing immediately life-threatening, the doctor said, but significant enough that he had started talking about his affairs. Putting things in order. He had mentioned a meeting with his attorney, an updated will. He hadn't given me details and I hadn't asked. I didn't want to think about what came after him. Brooke had organized Thanksgiving that year. She insisted on hosting at my father's house in Richmond, which in retrospect, I should have understood as strategy. She had flown in early. She had set the table herself, arranged the centerpiece herself, assigned seats herself. She had put me at the far end of the table, between two cousins I barely knew, and placed herself at my father's right hand. There were 14 people there. My father's sister and her husband. 3 cousins. Brooke's husband, who smiled at everything and said nothing. My father's oldest friend from college, a man named Gerald who had known our family since before I was born. I remember the candles and the smell of rosemary and the way my father looked tired but happy. The kind of happy that older people sometimes get at family gatherings. A happiness that knows it is running out. Brooke gave the first toast. She stood up with her glass and she talked about family, about legacy, about what our father had built. She said all the right things in the right order. She was good at that. And then, when everyone had put their glasses down, she smiled across the table at me and said, so conversationally, that a few people didn't catch the shift. I just hope we're all actually family enough to appreciate it. The table went quiet in the uneven way that means some people heard what you meant and some people only heard what you said. I looked at her. She was still smiling. Brooke, my father said quietly. I'm just saying, she said, setting down her glass, that Dad's been so generous his whole life. To everyone. It might be worth knowing exactly who's at this table. She reached beside her chair and lifted a small gift bag, the kind with tissue paper and a ribbon, and she held it out in my direction. I got you an early Christmas present, Sophie. Something that might answer some questions. For all of us. I didn't move. Gerald, who was sitting near me, leaned over and took the bag and passed it down. I opened it because 14 people were looking at me and I had no other option. Inside, under the tissue paper, was a DNA ancestry kit. The table was completely silent. I found some old letters, Brooke said, in a tone that suggested this was a natural continuation. From before you were born, Mom wrote to a friend, there was a man. She paused. I think it's better we just know. I set the kit down on the table. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. My father stood up. He didn't say much. He said, that's enough. And then he asked Brooke's husband to take her for a walk, and he asked everyone else to give him a moment, and he came down to my end of the table and put his hand on my shoulder, the way he had always done, the way that meant I see you. And he looked at me for a long time without speaking. Don't let her do this to you, he said finally. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. We got through the rest of dinner. People talked carefully, the way they do after something has happened that no one knows how to name. Brooke came back to the table and ate her food and acted like nothing was different. She was good at that too. I drove back to my hotel that night and lay on top of the covers in my coat and stared at the ceiling. The kit was in my bag. I hadn't meant to take it. It had just ended up there, packed with my things when I was leaving, and I hadn't taken it back out. I flew home to Austin 2 days later. I put the kit on the kitchen counter. I went to work. I came home. I looked at it. I went to work again. On the third day, I opened it. I told myself I was doing it to be done with it. I told myself that if the answer was what I believed, what I had always believed, what every Sunday phone call and vegetable garden and hand on my shoulder had told me, then I would have something solid to stand on. I would know. And knowing had to be better than the doubt my sister had been feeding me for 15 years. I swabbed the inside of my cheek. I sealed the vial. I mailed it back on my way to work, not thinking about it, trying not to think about it. Then I went and did my job and put it somewhere in the back of my mind where I put things I wasn't ready to look at. 6 weeks later, the envelope came. I opened it in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, still in pajamas, coffee going cold beside me. The results were several pages, most of it ancestry breakdown, percentages of this and that. I flipped through until I found the paternity section because I had paid for the extended family matching service without fully deciding to. The way you do something without admitting you're doing it. There was a match already in the database. A DNA profile submitted under the initials RH, listed as a predicted close family match, father-child relationship. Confidence level, greater than 99%. RH were my father's initials, Robert Hargrove. He had submitted his own DNA to the same service. He hadn't told me. He had just done it, quietly, the way he did most things. And when the results came back, they said what I had always known in the part of me that wasn't listening to my sister. I called him that afternoon, on a Saturday, not our Sunday, because I couldn't wait. He picked up on the second ring. I know, he said, before I could say anything. I was waiting for you to call." He told me he had submitted his sample 2 years earlier after the first time Brooke had said something at a family gathering that he had overheard. He said he had thought about telling me but hadn't wanted to give her words more weight than they deserved. He said, "You were always mine." I never needed a test to know that. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while after we hung up. Just sat there with my back against the cabinet and my coffee somewhere above me getting cold. Not crying exactly, but something adjacent to it. The kind of feeling that doesn't have a clean name. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for another 4 months, was that my father had made a phone call of his own after that Thanksgiving dinner. Not to me, to his attorney. My father died in February. It was the heart, as we had known it would be eventually. He had made it to Christmas, to his 71st birthday, to a warm spell in January when he had gotten out to the garden even though it was too early for planting. I had flown up in January and we had sat on the back porch drinking coffee, and he had shown me where he was thinking of putting a new raised bed in the spring. He hadn't made it to spring. The attorney's office was in Richmond, a quiet building downtown with frosted glass and a receptionist who spoke in the careful tone of someone used to dealing with people at difficult moments. Brooke was already there when I arrived, sitting with her husband in the chairs near the window, in a good coat, with the composed expression she wore when she was confident about something. She glanced at me when I came in. She didn't smile exactly, but her chin lifted slightly, the kind of micro-adjustment that means I'm ready. The attorney's name was Carol Whitfield, and she was precise and unhurried in a way that I found steadying. She had known my father for many years, she said. She had updated his documents most recently in December, 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. She wanted us to understand that the will we were about to hear reflected his wishes clearly and in full. Brooke's husband put his hand on her knee. Carol read through the preliminary portions, the house, the accounts, the details of the estate, which was more substantial than I had realized. My father had been careful with his money for 40 years. The house alone, and the neighborhood it was in, was worth a significant amount. And then Carol looked up and said, "Your father also prepared an attachment to this will, a personal letter which he asked me to read aloud before I continue." She put on her glasses. She unfolded a page. My father had written it by hand and then typed it up, she said. He had wanted it in the record, but he had also wanted it to sound like him. She read, "I am writing this because I want there to be no confusion and no room for contest. I have spent my life trying to be fair. I have not always succeeded, but I have always known who my daughters are, and I have always known the difference between what a person is worth and what they demand. Brooke has been given every opportunity I could provide. Sophie has been given the same, and she has been quieter about taking it, which is her way. I am proud of both of them in different degrees for different reasons, and I will not pretend otherwise even now. But I have witnessed, over the past several years, a pattern of behavior directed at Sophie that I cannot leave unremarked. A parent sees more than his children believe. I saw. I am sorry I did not say more when I was alive. This is what I am saying now." Carol paused. The room was very still. She continued, "I have updated my will accordingly. The house and its contents I leave to Sophie to do with as she chooses. The investment accounts I divide 65% to Sophie and 35% to Brooke. The personal items listed in the attached schedule I have marked individually. I ask only that they be treated with the respect they deserve, which I believe Sophie will do." Carol folded the letter. She set it down on the table with the careful precision of someone handling something that matters. Brooke did not move for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "That can't be right." Carol looked at her with the patient expression of someone who had been in this room many times before. "It is the most recent version of the will, executed in December of last year, witnessed and notarized. Your father was of sound mind. His position provided documentation, as is standard. He was influenced," Brooke said. Her voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, a tightness. She called him more often at the end. "She flew up in January. He called me on Sundays," I said. It was the first thing I had said since we sat down. "He called me every Sunday at 7. He had done that my entire adult life." Brooke looked at me. "The DNA results matched," I said. "Greater than 99%. in case you were still wondering. Something moved across her face that I could not fully read. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was more like watching someone realize that the chessboard is not arranged the way they thought it was. Her husband put his hand on her arm. She looked down at the table. We finished the meeting. Carol gave us each copies of the relevant documents. She walked us out with the same careful tone. In the parking lot, I stood beside my car for a moment, keys in hand, and my sister walked past me without stopping. Her heels clicked on the pavement. Her husband glanced back once, briefly, and then they were at their car and then they were gone. I stood there for a little while longer. The February air was cold and clean, and a city pigeon was walking along the curb near my tire like it had somewhere important to be. I thought about my father in his garden in January, pointing at the spot where he had planned to put the new raised bed. I thought about how he had never told me what he was doing, how he had just done it, quietly, the way he always had. I thought about 14 people at a Thanksgiving table and a small gift bag with tissue paper and a ribbon. Brooke had handed me the shovel. She had told me to dig. She had not considered that what I would find was something that would make me more certain, not less. She had not considered that our father had been watching and thinking and writing letters. She had not considered that the weapon she had put in my hands would come back to her. People like my sister work from an assumption that other people are not paying attention. That confidence, it turns out, is also a blind spot. I flew back to Austin on a Thursday. I sat on the plane with my forehead against the cold oval of the window and watched the clouds and let myself feel the whole weight of the last year. The kid on the counter, the 3 days I didn't open the envelope, the phone call with my father on the kitchen floor, the Thanksgiving table, his hand on my shoulder. The Sunday calls had stopped in February. That was the hardest thing. Not the house, not the accounts, not any of the material outcome of what had happened. The 7 o'clock call, the way he would ask about my week and actually listen to the answer, and the way the conversation would eventually wind around to the garden or the weather or some book he was reading, until there was nothing left to say, and he would wrap it up in the warm and economical way he had. "All right, sweetheart, talk next week." There was no next week. There was just a Sunday at 7 with nothing in it. I did not call Brooke. She did not call me. I had not expected her to, and I did not expect that to change. That was okay. Not everything that breaks gets repaired, and not everything that breaks should be. Some damage is just the cost of finally seeing clearly. I kept the house in Richmond. I didn't sell it right away, even though keeping it meant property taxes and a management company and flights up twice a year. I kept it because the vegetable garden was there and because I wanted to put in the raised bed myself. In the spring, the way my father had planned it, I wanted to do at least that one thing. I went back in April. The forsythia along the back fence had come in while no one was watching, yellow and extravagant, the way forsythia always is in spring, like it's trying to make up for the whole winter at once. I rented a tiller from the hardware store down the street, and I broke ground for the bed myself, in the corner he had pointed to in January. And I planted tomatoes and basil and 1 row of the sugar snap peas he had always grown because he liked to eat them standing up in the garden before they ever made it to the kitchen. Gerald came by while I was working. He had heard I was in town, he said. He stood at the edge of the garden with his hands in his pockets and looked at what I was doing and nodded in the way of someone who approves of something without needing to say so directly. "He talked about you a lot," Gerald said. "More than you probably knew." I pushed the trowel into the soil and didn't say anything for a moment. "What did he say?" Gerald considered it. He was not a man who dressed things up. "He said you got quieter every year and he thought that was mostly his fault for not being louder." He paused. He said he should have put a stop to things earlier. He said he was sorry for that. I sat back on my heels in the dirt. "He also said you were the most like him of anyone he knew," Gerald added. "He said that like it was a good thing." I thought it probably was. I finished the bed. I flew back to Austin in May. In July, I got my first tomato, which Gerald picked for me and left on the kitchen counter with a note that said simply, 7 ounces, not bad. I found out about it on my Sunday call with him because Gerald had become, somewhat unexpectedly, the person I talked to on Sundays at 7, and he was not a man for small talk, but he was a man who listened, and that turned out to be enough. Brooke filed a preliminary inquiry with the estate attorney in March, something about undue influence, I was told. Her attorney reviewed the documentation, the notarized will, the physician's letter confirming our father's competency, the dated letter in his handwriting, and advised her that she did not have a viable case. I don't know the details beyond that. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Some months later, I got a text from her. Just one. It said, "I didn't think it would go like this." I read it twice. I thought about what to say. I thought about all the years of small comments, of kitchen conversations with their poisoned edges, of a gift bag passed down a Thanksgiving table in front of 14 people. I thought about an envelope on a kitchen counter that I couldn't open for 3 days because she had put enough doubt in me to be afraid of what I would find. I thought about my father standing up at the table. That's enough. I put the phone down and went back to what I was doing. Some doors you close not in anger, but in clarity, the way you close a window at the end of summer, not because you don't want the air, but because the season has changed. I had spent a long time standing in the draft of my sister's opinion of me. I was done with it, not bitterly, just done. My father used to say that character is what a person does when they think no one is watching. My sister thought no one was watching. He was watching the whole time.